In the 1800s, people from all over the world left their homes for North America, fleeing crop failure, unemployment, rising taxes, or starvation, believing the United States to be the country of economic opportunity. The courts and alleys of New York's Lower East Side became a melting pot of communities from all over the world. Immigrants gravitated to their own communities, but found harsh living conditions, often in tenement slums, where rents were cheaper, but exploitation was rife. There were never enough jobs available, and those that could be found were low pay. With so many people competing for work from different cultures, there was social conflict. Many experienced verbal and physical abuse, due to stereotypes and discrimination against them because they were considered different. Today, in an account told by Jacob Riis, 1849 to 1914, a Danish-American social reformer and photographer who made a significant contribution to the reform of living conditions in New York at the end of the 19th century, you will learn about the brutal lives of New York's Bohemian community, which emigrated from lands now located in and around the Czech Republic. Riis considered Bohemians to be miserably poor, the only immigrants of any significant number in New York, to have no wealthy man amongst them, and none that did not have to work hard for a living or could escape the tenement. These were families often trapped by landlords who, with one hand, gave out low-paid work in cigar making to their tenants and, with the other, demanded outrageously high rents for mean and dingy tenement rooms. Find out how they struggled to live, facing both prejudice as outsiders, competing for jobs, and unending work to survive, day and night, 7 days a week, constantly surrounded by tobacco and its rank smell. Before we move on, if you're interested in history like this, and you want to find out more about what life was really like for people in the past, please consider subscribing for more content. If you'd like to support what we make for you, check out the description for links to ways you can help us continue bringing the past alive. Perhaps the Bohemian Quarter is hardly the proper name to give to the colony, for though it has distinct boundaries, it is scattered over a wide area on the east side, in wedge-like streaks that relieve the monotony of the solid German population by their strong contrasts. The two races mingle no more on this side of the Atlantic than on the rugged slopes of the Bohemian mountains. The echoes of the 30 Years' War ring in New York, after 2 centuries and a half, with as fierce a hatred as the gigantic combat bred among the vanquished Czechs. A chief reason for this is doubtless the complete isolation of the Bohemian immigrant. Several causes operate to bring this about. Language, which he can neither easily himself unlearn nor impart to others, his stubborn pride, and a prejudice which has forced upon him the unjust stigma of a disturber of the public peace and an enemy of organized labor. I greatly mistrust that the Bohemian on our shores is a much-abused man. To his traducer, who casts up anarchism against him, he replies that the last census, 1880, shows his people to have the fewest criminals of all in proportion to numbers. In New York, a Bohemian criminal is such a rarity that the case of 2 firebugs of several years ago is remembered with damaging distinctness. The accusation that he lives like the rat he is, cutting down wages by his underpaid labor, he throws back in the teeth of the trades unions with the countercharge that they are the first cause of his attitude to the labor question. A little way above Houston Street, the first of his colonies is encountered. In 5th Street and thereabouts, then for 1.5 miles, scarce a Bohemian is to be found, until 38th Street is reached. 54th and 73rd Streets in their turn are the centres of populous Bohemian settlements. The location of the cigar factories, upon which he depends for a living, determines his choice of home, though there is less choice about it than with any other class in the community. save perhaps African Americans. Probably more than half of all the Bohemians in this city are cigar makers, and it is the herding of these in great numbers in the so-called tenement factories, where the cheapest grade of work is done at the lowest wages, that constitutes at once their greatest hardship and the chief grudge of other workmen against them. The manufacturer, who owns, say, from 3 or 4 to a dozen or more tenements contiguous to his shop, fills them up with these people, charging them outrageous rents, and demanding often even a preliminary deposit of $5 key money, deals them out tobacco by the week, and devotes the rest of his energies to the paring down of wages to within a peg or two of the point where the tenant rebels in desperation. When he does rebel, he is given the alternative of submission, or eviction with entire loss of employment. His needs determine the issue. Usually he is not in a position to hesitate long. He has seldom much laid up against a rainy day. He is fond of a glass of beer, and likes to live as well as his means will permit. The shop triumphs, and fetters more galling than ever are forged for the tenant. In the opposite case, the newspapers have to record the throwing upon the street of a small army of people, with pitiful cases of destitution and family misery. Men, women, and children work together 7 days in the week in these cheerless tenements to make a living for the family, from the break of day till far into the night. Often the wife is the original cigar maker from the old home, the husband having adopted her trade here as a matter of necessity, because, knowing no word of English, he could get no other work. As they state the cause of the bitter hostility of the trades unions. She was the primary bone of contention in the day of the early Bohemian immigration. The unions refused to admit the women, and as the support of the family depended upon her to a large extent, such terms as were offered had to be accepted. The manufacturer has ever since industriously fanned the antagonism between the unions and his hands for his own advantage. The victory rests with him, since the Court of Appeals decided that the law, passed a few years ago, to prohibit cigar making in tenements was unconstitutional, and thus put an end to the struggle. While it lasted, all sorts of frightful stories were told of the shocking conditions under which people lived and worked in these tenements. From a sanitary point of view especially, and a general impression survives to this day that they are particularly desperate. The Board of Health, after a careful canvass, did not find them so then. I am satisfied, from personal inspection, at a much later day, guided in a number of instances by the union cigar makers themselves to the tenements which they considered the worst, that the accounts were greatly exaggerated. Doubtless the people are poor, in many cases very poor, but they are not uncleanly. Rather the reverse. They live much better than the clothing makers in the 10th Ward, and in spite of their sallow look, that may be due to the all-pervading smell of tobacco. They do not appear to be less healthy than other indoor workers. I found on my tours of investigation several cases of consumption, of which one at least was said by the doctor to be due to the constant inhalation of tobacco fumes. But an examination of the death records in the health department does not support the claim that the Bohemian cigar makers are peculiarly prone to that disease. On the contrary, the Bohemian percentage of deaths from consumption appears quite low. This, however, is a line of scientific inquiry which I leave others to pursue, along with a more involved problem whether the falling off in the number of children, sometimes quite noticeable in the Bohemian settlements, is, as has been suggested, dependent upon the character of the parents' work. The sore grievances I found were the miserable wages and the enormous rents exacted for the minimum of accommodation. And surely these stand for enough of suffering. Take a row of houses in East 10th Street as an instance. They contained 35 families of cigar makers, with probably not half a dozen persons in the whole lot of them, outside of the children who could speak a word of English, though many had been in the country half a lifetime. This room, with 2 windows giving on the street and a rear attachment without windows, called a bedroom by courtesy, is rented at $12.25 a month. In the front room, man and wife work at the bench from 6 in the morning till 9 at night. They make a team, stripping the tobacco leaves together. Then he makes the filler, and she rolls the wrapper on and finishes the cigar. For 1,000, they receive $3.75, and can turn out together 3,000 cigars a week. The point has been reached where the rebellion comes in, and the workers in these tenements are just now on a strike, demanding $5 and $5.50 for their work. The manufacturer having refused, they are expecting hourly to be served with notice to quit their homes, and the going of a stranger among them excites their resentment, until his errand is explained. While we are in the house, the ultimatum of the boss is received. He will give $3.75 1,000, not another cent. Our host is a man of seeming intelligence, yet he has been 9 years in New York and knows neither English nor German. 3 bright little children play about the floor. His neighbour on the same floor has been here 15 years, but shakes his head when asked if he can speak English. He answers in a few broken syllables when addressed in German. With $11.75 rent to pay for like accommodation, he has the advantage of his oldest boy's work besides his wife's at the bench. 3 properly make a team, and these 3 can turn out 4,000 cigars a week at $3.75. This Bohemian has a large family. There are 4 children, too small to work, to be cared for. Here is a suite of 3 rooms, 2 dark, 3 flights up. The ceiling is partly down in one of the rooms. It is 3 months since we asked the landlord to fix it, says the oldest son, a very intelligent lad who has learned English in the evening school. His father has not had that advantage, and has sat at his bench, deaf and dumb to the world about him except his own, for 6 years. He has improved his time and become an expert at his trade. Father, mother, and son together, a full team, make from $15 to $16 a week. A man with venerable beard and keen eyes answers our questions through an interpreter in the next house. Very few brighter faces would be met in a day's walk among American mechanics, yet he has in 9 years learned no syllable of English. German he probably does not want to learn. His story supplies the explanation, as did the stories of the others. In all that time he has been at work grubbing to earn bread. Wife and he, by constant labour, make 3,000 cigars a week, earning $11.25 when there is no lack of material. When in winter they receive from the manufacturer tobacco for only $2,000, the rent of $10 for 2 rooms, practically one with a dark alcove, has nevertheless to be paid in full, and 6 mouths to be fed. He was a blacksmith in the old country, but cannot work at his trade here because he does not understand Englishka. If he could, he says, with a bright look, he could do better work than he sees done here. It would seem happiness to him to knock off at 6 o'clock instead of working, as he now often has to do, till midnight. But how? He knows of no Bohemian blacksmith who can understand him. He should starve. Here, with his wife, he can make a living at least. "Aye," says she, turning from listening to her household duties. "It would be nice for sure to have father work at his trade. Then what a home she could make for them, and how happy they would be. Here is an unattainable ideal, indeed, of a workman in the most prosperous city in the world. There is genuine, if unspoken, pathos in the soft tap she gives her husband's hand as she goes about her work with a half-suppressed little sigh. The very ash barrels that stand in front of the big rows of tenements in 71st and 73rd Streets advertise the business that is carried on within. They are filled to the brim with the stems of stripped tobacco leaves. The rank smell that waited for us on the corner of the block follows us into the hallways, penetrates every nook and cranny of the houses. As in the settlement farther downtown, every room here has its workbench with its stumpy knife and queer pouch of bed tick, worn brown and greasy, fastened in front of the whole length of the bench to receive the scraps of waste. This landlord-employer at all events gives 3 rooms for $12.50. If two be dark, one holy and the other getting some light from the front room. The mother of the 3 barefooted little children we met on the stairs was taken to the hospital the other day when she could no longer work. She will never come out alive. There is no waste in these tenements. Lives, like clothes, are worn through and out before put aside. Her place at the bench is taken already by another who divides with the head of the household his earnings of $15.50 a week. He has just come out successful of a strike that brought the pay of these tenements up to $4.50 per 1,000 cigars. Notice to quit had already been served on them when the employer decided to give in, frightened by the prospective loss of rent. Asked how long he works, the man says, "From they can see till bedtime." Bedtime proves to be 11 o'clock. 17 hours a day, 7 days in the week, at 13 cents an hour for the 2, 6 cents and a half for each. Good average earnings for a tenement house cigar maker in summer. In winter it is at least 1/4 less. In spite of it all, the rooms are cleanly kept. From the bedroom farthest back, the woman brings out a pile of moist tobacco leaves to be stripped. They are kept there, under cover, lest they dry and crack. From Friday to Friday, when an accounting is made and fresh supplies given out, the people sleep there too, but the smell, offensive to the unfamiliar nose, does not bother them. They are used to it. In a house around the corner that is not a factory tenement lives now the cigar maker I spoke of as suffering from consumption, which the doctor said was due to the tobacco fumes. Perhaps the lack of healthy exercise had as much to do with it. His case is interesting from its own standpoint. He, too, is one with for a Bohemian, large family. 6 children sit at his table. By trade a shoemaker. For 13 years he helped his wife make cigars in the manufacturer's tenement. She was a very good hand, and until his health gave out 2 years ago, they were able to make from $17 to $25 a week, by lengthening the day at both ends. Now that he can work no more, and the family under the doctor's orders has moved away from the smell of tobacco, the burden of its support has fallen upon her alone. For none of the children are old enough to help. She has work in the shop at $8 a week, and this must go round. It is all there is. Happily, this being a tenement for revenue only, unmixed with cigars, the rent is cheaper, $7 for 2 bright rooms on the top floor. No housekeeping is attempted. A woman in 72nd Street supplies their cooking, which the wife and mother fetches in a basket, her husband being too weak. Breakfast of coffee and hard tack, or black bread, at 20 cents for the whole 8, a good many, the little woman says with a brave, patient smile, and there is seldom anything to spare. But the invalid is listening, and the sentence remains unfinished. What of dinner? One of the children brings it from the cook. Oh, it is a good dinner. Meat, soup, greens, and bread, all for 30 cents. It is the principal family meal. Does she come home for dinner? No, she cannot leave the shop, but gets a bite at her bench. The question, a bite of what, seems as merciless as the surgeon's knife, and she winces under it as one shrinks from physical pain. Bread, then, But at night they all have supper together, sausage and bread. For 10 cents they can eat all they want, can they not? She says, stroking the hair of the little boy at her knee. His eyes glisten hungrily at the thought, as he nods stoutly in support of his mother. Only, she adds, the week the rent is due, they have to shorten rations to pay the landlord. But what of his being an anarchist, this Bohemian, an infidel? I hear somebody say, almost one might be persuaded by such facts as these, and they are everyday facts, not fancy, to retort, what more natural? With every hand raised against him in the old land and the new, in the land of his hope for freedom. What more logical than this should be turned against society that seems to exist only for his oppression? But the charge is not half true. Naturally, the Bohemian loves peace, as he loves music and song. As someone has said, he does not seek war, but when attacked knows better how to die than how to surrender. The Czech is the Irishman of Central Europe, with all his genius and his strong passions, with the same bitter traditions of landlord robbery perpetuated here where he thought to forget them. Like him, ever and on principle, in the opposition. Again the government, wherever he goes. Among such a people, ground by poverty until their songs have died in curses upon their oppressors, hopelessly isolated and ignorant of our language and our laws, it would not be hard for bad men at any time to lead a few astray. And this is what has been done. Thus the whole matter resolves itself once more into a question of education, all the more urgent because these people are poor, miserably poor, almost to a man. There is not, said one of them who knew thoroughly what he was speaking of, there is not one of them all who, if he were to sell all he was worth tomorrow, would have money enough to buy a house and a lot in the country.